The memory of that summer still haunts me, like a shadow that refuses to fade. It was a season bathed in sunlight and warmth, a time for barbecues, ice cream cones, and laughter. Yet, as the days grew longer, the nights brought with them an unsettling dread that cast a chilling pall over our idyllic suburban existence. I have never been able to forget what transpired, and every time I close my eyes, I am drawn back to that house, the house on Hawthorne Street. I had been living in that quaint, two-story colonial for years. My wife, Lisa, and I had picked the place for its charm, with its white picket fence and a welcoming front porch. The neighborhood was friendly, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and waved as you strolled by. It was the perfect setting for raising our daughter, Sophie, who was 6 years old at the time. However, in the summer of 2017, something sinister lurked beneath the veneer of suburban bliss. It started innocently enough, with small occurrences dismissed as mere coincidence. A creaking floorboard in the middle of the night, a tap on the window pane that could be attributed to a tree branch. Lisa and I would chuckle about these occurrences, attributing them to our overactive imaginations. But soon enough, the laughter faded, replaced by a gnawing suspicion that something was terribly wrong. The first hint of malevolence occurred on a quiet Wednesday evening. As I was reading a bedtime story to Sophie, I heard an unfamiliar sound coming from the basement. It was a subtle scratching, like a rat trying to gnaw its way through a wall. I kissed my daughter goodnight and promised her it was probably just a mouse, then made my way to the basement. Descending the creaky wooden steps, the air grew cooler and my senses heightened. The scratching grew louder as I approached the basement door, my heart pounding in my chest. When I flung the door open, expecting to confront a rodent, I was met with darkness and nothing more. But that didn't quell my unease. Lisa assured me that it was just the house settling, and for a while, I forced myself to believe her. After all, I didn't want to fill our lives with fear and paranoia. However, as the days passed, the noises escalated. At times, it sounded like distant whispers, and on others, like faint, muffled cries. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was down there, hiding, waiting. One evening, as Lisa and I were cleaning up the kitchen after dinner, Sophie piped up. "Daddy, I saw something in the basement." I turned to her, concerned. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Sophie's eyes were wide and innocent, but her voice was trembling. A man in the basement. He was looking at me. Lisa and I exchanged worried glances. "Are you sure, honey?" Lisa asked gently. Sophie nodded. He had a beard, and he looked sad. I was alarmed, but tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a neighborhood kid who had wandered into our yard. "Did you talk to him?" I asked. Sophie shook her head. "No, I ran upstairs and told my dolly." "I was scared," Lisa reassured Sophie, but I felt a chill run down my spine. We called the police, who came over and searched our house and the neighborhood. They found nothing, and we were told it was probably a harmless intruder who had fled. But that didn't explain the relentless noises coming from the basement. The police suggested installing security cameras, which we did, but the recordings yielded nothing suspicious. The odd sounds persisted, and we felt an ever-increasing sense of dread. As the weeks passed, Lisa and I took turns monitoring the basement, setting up camp in a makeshift command center with a bank of surveillance screens. We would listen intently to the audio feed, hoping to identify the source of the sounds. We both knew that we were letting paranoia consume us, but we couldn't help ourselves. Our lives had become a relentless cycle of fear and obsession. One night, after hours of watching the monitors, I spotted a flicker of movement in one of the camera feeds. I zoomed in and saw a man's face, bearded and disheveled, staring directly into the camera. Panic coursed through my veins. This was the man Sophie had seen. I screamed for Lisa, who rushed to the monitor, her face contorting in terror as she saw the intruder's face. The man didn't seem to be doing anything. He just stared at the camera, his eyes filled with a sorrow I couldn't fathom. The sight of him was horrifying, but at the same time, it was strangely pitiful. We called the police again, and within minutes, they were at our door. The officers searched the basement once more, but found nothing. They reassured us, yet I could see the doubt in their eyes. This intruder had never left any physical trace of his presence, but we knew he was real. The recordings of his face and Sophie's testimony were undeniable. We decided to stay with friends for a few nights while we collected our thoughts. Our friends, John and Sarah, were sympathetic, but they too believed that our fears were unfounded. We tried to convince ourselves that we were overreacting, that we'd return to our house and everything would be back to normal. A few nights later, as we stood on John and Sarah's porch, our friend Mark called, his voice trembling with shock and fear. "You guys need to come back to your house right now," he urged. We raced home, not knowing what to expect. Mark was waiting for us at the door, his face pale and drawn. He led us to the basement and showed us a section of the wall that had been freshly damaged. The drywall had been clawed and scratched, and it was still wet with a dark crimson substance. I heard strange noises coming from the basement, so I decided to check it out, Mark explained. When I got down there, I saw this. My heart sank. The sight was gruesome, and it was apparent that the marks were not made by an animal. These were human marks, as if someone had desperately tried to escape. A sense of dread washed over us, and we called the police once again. This time, the officers brought in forensic investigators. They carefully documented the damage and took samples of the mysterious substance on the wall. After hours of thorough examination, they delivered unsettling news. The substance was blood, but it didn't match our DNA, nor did it match any missing persons in the area. It was as if the blood belonged to someone who had never officially existed. As the days turned into weeks, our lives began to unravel. The police couldn't find any leads, and we were left in a constant state of anxiety. The whispers and cries from the basement continued, and Lisa's mental state deteriorated rapidly. She began to see the bearded man in her dreams, his haunting visage plaguing her sleep. I was helpless, unable to console her as she descended into madness. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a paranormal investigator, convinced that something beyond our comprehension was at play. He arrived at our house with an arsenal of equipment, including night vision cameras and voice recorders. As he explored the basement, we watched the footage in real time. The investigator's face turned ashen as he reviewed the recordings. "I've never seen anything like this," he mumbled, shaking his head. "What did you find?" I demanded. He looked at me, his eyes haunted. "There's something down there, something that doesn't belong to this world. I can't explain it, but it's as if there's a tear in the fabric of reality." I scoffed at the idea, refusing to accept that a paranormal explanation was the answer. But I couldn't deny that the evidence was mounting, pointing to something far beyond our understanding. The paranormal investigator set up a series of cameras in the basement, hoping to capture concrete evidence of the intruder. We watched the monitors with bated breath, but what we saw defied explanation. The bearded man, his face contorted in sorrow, appeared on the screen. He wasn't alone. He was surrounded by other figures, indistinct and flickering, as if in and out of existence. They moved in unnatural ways, phasing in and out of the physical world. It was a terrifying spectacle, and the basement seemed to be a portal to something that was both incomprehensible and malevolent. The paranormal investigator quickly retreated from the basement, his conviction shattered. He told us that he couldn't help us, that this was beyond the realm of anything he had ever encountered. With a trembling hand, he left our house, leaving us with a horrifying realization. We were alone in this nightmare. The basement's activity escalated. It felt as though the entities were growing stronger, more determined to break through to our world. I couldn't bear the thought of Sophie being in danger, so we sent her to live with my parents while we confronted the terror that had gripped our lives. Lisa and I decided to face the basement head-on. Armed with flashlights, we descended into the darkness, determined to confront the source of our torment. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, the air grew colder, and the whispers and cries grew louder. We found the source of the disturbance in a corner of the basement, hidden behind a pile of old furniture. There, etched into the concrete floor, was a strange symbol. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, a series of intricate lines and curves that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. As we approached the symbol, the whispers grew more intense, and the temperature dropped even further. We realized that the basement had become a conduit for these otherworldly entities, and that the symbol was their gateway. In a desperate bid to put an end to this nightmare, we decided to destroy the symbol. Armed with sledgehammers and crowbars, we took turns smashing the concrete. With each strike, the whispers grew louder, and the air crackled with malevolent energy. It was a battle against an unseen force, and it seemed like an eternity before the symbol finally shattered. As the last piece of concrete fell, a deafening roar filled the basement, and a blinding light engulfed us. I felt myself being pulled into a vortex, and I reached out for Lisa, but she was torn from my grasp. The world seemed to collapse around me, and then, darkness. I awoke in a hospital bed, my body battered and broken. The doctors told me I had been found unconscious in the basement, and Lisa was missing. The police launched a search, but no trace of her was ever found. I tried to explain what had happened, the symbol, the entities, but no one believed me. The official report stated that Lisa had disappeared without a trace, and I had suffered a mental breakdown. They said the symbol in the basement was a mere figment of my imagination. I know the truth, though. I know that something otherworldly had taken my wife, and that our lives had been forever changed by the malevolent forces that lurked in the shadows of that suburban house on Hawthorne Street. Now, as I sit alone in our empty house, I can still hear the whispers and cries emanating from the basement. I can feel their presence, and I know they're waiting, biding their time until they can find another way to break through. I will never give up on finding Lisa, on uncovering the mystery of the bearded man and the entities that haunt our lives. But as the shadows lengthen and the night approaches, I can't help but feel that we are trapped in a never-ending nightmare, with no escape in sight. The horror of that summer will never leave me, and I can only hope that someday I will find the answers I seek, and that the terror that has consumed our lives will finally be put to rest. Until then, the shadow in the basement remains, a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unsuspecting of places.